you can pass the, Brian? Okay,
Don't forget microphones.
microphones, please.
Morena koutou, me karakia tātou, te matua tātou hui, e te ato tomātou whae na tēnei te whakamoe me te kia koe, mo tēnei hui ngā o mātou I tēnei ana. Ka te aho tomātou na tanga me ko ora I au kuku kore, ka tīmata mahi ka mau te tika me tāo. Me a tia ki utona kia mātou e to aroha I roto I tēnei hui ngā o mātou. Ka kia mātou whakaaro mātou mahi kato e to wairuata. Kua mai te wairua tapu he manaki he te haki I mata. Tēnei mātou e tuohu nei ki mua I tō arau. Ka tuku I tēnei ino e I runga I te ingoa o tō mātou kaipako ora a I hukarai ki tāna.
Amen. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Let's get into it. We have 18 items on the agenda here, and can I lower this a little? Good morning, Peter. And we are trying to be finished by 2 p.m., given that we have a further meeting with the Hastings District Council scheduled for that time. So we'll see how we do here. That gives us about 3.5 minutes per agenda item. Any notices? I have none. Councillor Dick.
Mr. Chairman, I'm wearing a hearing aid for the first time ever, and it sounds like I'm sitting in a tin can with ball bearings rattling around in it. So if I'm going to have to do some fiddling around to try and get it right.
All right. Shall we speak lower to test your capabilities?
I can hear you all right. The problem is I can hear you too well.
All right. Apologies. I have apologies from Rick Barker. Fenton is going to be maybe 10 minutes late, and Peter Bevan left some message about being with Pink Ladies in Thailand, and looking forward to that report. Otherwise, we are present and accounted for.
Pink Lady Conference.
Oh, Pink Lady Conference, sure. Morning, Fenton. All right, do we have to accept those apologies? Have someone to move to do that? Councillor Curtin, a second, please. Councillor Graham, thank you. All those in favor? Aye, opposed, okay. Any conflict of interest declarations for the day? Hear none. Let's go to confirmation of the minutes of July 12. And I guess first for accuracy, just flip through these. Everybody organized, page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. No comments on the minutes.
So did anyone read them?
I did.
You did? We'll take the extra vote then on page 5. That'd be good.
Page 5. Are you raising an issue on page 5? No?
I was happy with the extra vote.
Yeah, it's incorrect.
Councillor
Just
Wilson's
wondering
been noted twice.
Yeah, we're all good with that. We need some numbers.
Oh, 2 Wilsons. All right, with that correction, can we adopt the minutes? Somebody move that? Councillor Dick, thank you. Seconder? That's the Fenton, thank you. Any comments on these minutes? Other than that correction? I hear and see none, so we shall move on. Follow-ups from previous committee meetings, page 5 of your agenda. I guess, Graham, these are going to fall to you. If you can speak for Campbell.
Yep, as simple as they've all been actioned, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any concerns about any of those? All right. Do we have to do anything about that? No? Do I need a mover and a seconder? Mover, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Bevan. Is that Bevan? Oh, Bailey, okay. All those in favor? Aye. Okay. What a compliant group this morning. Any minor items for the agenda? Councillor Wilson.
Whakaki Lake. Brookdale Reserve.
Brookvale.
Brookdale.
Brookdale.
Brookvale, isn't it? Brookvale Road where the wells are. I think.
Wells.
Brookvale. Oh. Oh, God, I don't know mine, Rui. Another one, Matariki.
And I have one, water containers. All right. So we're into it. First item is management of water takes on the Heretaunga Plains. And Ian, are you, who's Liz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morena. This paper is setting out the proposed approach that the consents team wishes to follow for at least the short to medium term until such time as new policies and rules are in place under the tank process. It's arisen as a result of the findings from our groundwater modelling that were presented to, first of all, the tank group 2 or 3 weeks ago, and secondly, Dr. Smith presented the same findings last week to the Regional Planning Committee meeting. So we haven't asked them to present yet again. Some of you have seen it already twice, and everyone has had a chance to hear it once. But this is really not a paper about the science or even about the long-term solutions. This is actually seeking guidance from you as a council around the interim approach that needs to be adopted in order to be able to deal with the issue that we face. So the proposal that's been set out has really looked at 2 different options. One of them is to do nothing, and in our view, that's quite high risk, because we believe that, well, the science is telling us that actually where we've got to at the moment in terms of level of use of groundwater is where we're at with dynamic equilibrium, and therefore the in terms of sustainable management has probably reached its resources. As you'll be aware from the paper, while the level of use is at that point, actually the level it's allocated is about twice that. So the risk is that there are significant transfers of water, for example, which will increase the level of use, that there is potentially a significant number of applications to take more water ahead of any policies and rules that might be in place through tank. And that's if we do nothing. In other words, we just continue with the current processes that we follow. So what we've set out is if you like, a precautionary approach to how we manage these, and it does recognise that there are if you like, rights that existing consent holders have, and we want to provide them with as much certainty as possible that they are able to carry on using their allocation, and for those who are in the process of buying properties or who have made inquiries around resource consents, we've certainly looked to set out a process to assist them. But in terms of new resource consents, we believe that we should follow the process that was adopted on the Heretaunga Plains a number of years ago before Plan Change 6 came into place, and that was really to require any new applications to provide a significant amount of evidence that their particular application would not have more than minor adverse effects on the groundwater resource. And that's set out in paragraphs 12.10 through to 12.13. We can't decline to receive applications. That's a right anyone has to actually lodge them. So this is the mechanism by which we would look at managing those and in effect not making the problem worse until such time as the Regional Planning Committee and the Council have decided how they're going to work their way ahead through the tank plan change process. So the paper itself sets out the detail around some of the specific issues that we've already been asked. We've had a number of phone calls already since the press release went out about the groundwater issue, and I'm happy to take questions, Mr. Chairman.
I've got a few questions, Chair, but I'm happy just to perhaps take one now and then maybe it opens it up. But how many applications were there in the Heretaunga Plains with this particular set of conditions? I mean, did it effectively stop applications anyway?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that. I've just asked Mr. Miller to come down, and he would be able to quantify that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Liz, can I take you to your section 12.3? And upon expiry of a current consent, I'm not clear what the language, what the words you've said there or whoever's written them actually mean. Does it mean that the consent holder can expect to have the same quantum of water consented, or does it mean we're in a position to reduce the previously consented amount?
What that means there is that a person could apply for and be granted consent to take the same amount of water that they currently have, but we say it's likely that greater scrutiny may be made. So when we're looking at their justification for the amount of water that's being required, we'd certainly be looking at crop needs.
You're being ambiguous again. Are we in a position to reduce the previously consented quantity, irrespective of the desired use or utility? Can we say, sorry, you got 10,000 cube, now we can only give you 5?
You could, there are a number of ways that you can change. Effectively, it's a condition of consent, the volume. So you could call it in, you could wait for its annual review phase, and you could then review the conditions. It's quite difficult and problematic to run a clawback process and reduce in the absence of policy. You'd have to bring all of the consents in and manage them all in one lump, because it's the cumulative effect of all of the takes, not an individual take at a time. So it's not impossible. It would be very likely difficult and potentially quite costly to do one at a time. The best solution is to run the policy process, have your limits and allocation, and within the policy development process, you'll also prescribe a method of clawback if that's required to bring you back to a new limit.
Perhaps I should rephrase it. Can you or can you not do it?
Well, legally you can. The answer
so
is yes.
That's the answer. Is if you can, you can. If you can't, you can't. So we're clear that if under pressure we could reduce the quantum of an existing consent that has expired, we could do that.
Well, if a consent expires, that's very simple, because it expires then it's replaced by a new one, and all bets are off at that stage. It's what I was saying. It's more problematic with existing consents that are already in operation that you want to review.
So the two questions.
Two are quite different.
One is a current consent, which is current and operable, and there are difficulties in reducing that.
Correct.
if it expires, we can take steps to reduce it.
All bets are off at that stage.
Thank
It's
you,
a
that's
new,
the
it's a
answer.
new process.
Yeah.
Chair, can I perhaps just add to that, because I think I have a sense of what the council is trying to understand. When consents expire, there are existing use right obligations within the Act that would suggest that, particularly in the absence of the policy that Mr Maxwell was referring to, which is currently being worked through in the tank plan change process, we would be in a position where we would be most likely to roll over the existing level of use. Now, where there is an allocation and a consent which exceeds that existing use by some margin, and it's evident that there are many consents on the Heretaunga Plains that fall into that category, we would be seeking to shave off, if you like, that over-allocation and reconsent or put the new consent in on the basis of actual and required use. Now, if there are plans to develop a property that would require additional water, in the absence of clear policy, we'd be likely to provide for that. But certainly where there is unused allocation that isn't required, we'd be looking to remove that at the point of replacing the consents. You got anything you want to add to that?
No, I agree.
Councillor Dick?
Thanks, Mr Chairman. Now, I've asked Mr Maxwell this over the phone, but I'd just like to do it again publicly, so it's reasonably on the record. This comes as a surprise to me, and I guess to most of us, because we've been under the understanding that the Rua Taniwha was fully allocated, if not over-allocated, but that the Heretaunga was not. So can you just describe the process that you've been through and the steps that you've taken to validate the veracity of this new scientific information?
Yep, so Jeff Smith presented to the RPC last week the science that underpins the paper that the team have put up today. And effectively, where we're at now is that the model that the groundwater team have been building over the last sort of 3 years is at the stage where we're starting to use it in anger. So we're using it to run scenarios, and obviously one of the first set of scenarios we ran was what's happening with the status quo, what's happening with the current use and the paper allocation of consents. And what the modelling has revealed is that the effects of groundwater takes are far more widespread on surface water flows than we'd previously assumed and we had knowledge of. So the information now is that the groundwater system is very transmissive, water flows quite quickly, not everywhere, through parts of it, certainly far quicker than we had understood, and that it is far more connected to surface water bodies than we had previously understood and had managed to. So the models effectively come along and said, look, it's changed your thinking, the connection is broader and it's a lot quicker than we had assumed. So that then obviously drives, has driven the need to reflect on the way that we're currently managing it. In terms of the model build has probably been one of the most comprehensive, I would say, certainly in the southern hemisphere, and when I was in Europe and talking to the European people about how we've gone about it, they were hugely impressed. Certainly they've never approached modelling like this in the way we have. It's been very collaborative, so we've built it in partnership with many CRIs. We've built it in collaboration with international experts who've been part of an advisory panel, and we've built it in collaboration with a technical advisory group who have comprised external parties from various stakeholders, partners and interest groups, providing some look and feel into this thing. So we're very confident of the model in terms of its fitness for purpose for a regional scale view of what is happening to groundwater and surface water across the Heretaunga Plain. There is no better option, there is no better tool. This is the best tool, and it's the best tool that we could provide to this exercise. And obviously what it's done is it's kind of flipped on its head our thinking around the way this resource behaves. The other point I would make, and I think I made to Councillor Dick, is that importantly, what it's not showing is that you've got a burning platform that you're standing on, and that we're poised on the brink of major catastrophic impacts on ground and surface water across this plain. What it's allowed us to do is to predict out into the future what would happen if we carry on without drawing a line in the sand and stopping and making changes. And those outward-looking views are not particularly palatable in terms of effects on surface water, particularly in the Nararara River and the spring flows across the plain. So hence the advice from the scientists back to the consents and planning team was, hey look, we think that you should probably, to use a commonly used term now, have a cup of tea and pause here, because there are things that we see problems in the future that if you don't take action on now, you're just adding to the problem out into the future. You're adding to an issue you have to manage back into the future. If you see that there's an over-allocation problem, by allowing more water to be added to the pot, you're simply adding to an over-allocation problem that you'll have at some stage in the future. So you should probably stop now until we've resolved the policy around this.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Through experience, I've gone off tea. I am, however, assured that there's been wide consultation on this, but I did suggest to Mr. Maxwell that he have a word with Russell Bayliss, the well driller, who, is not a scientist, but has views, and if he has a view that's contrary to ours, then the public is going to know about it. So I think that would be a prudent move.
Councillor Graham and then Councillor Bailey.
Just along those lines a little bit, I have no problem with the science. I think the science is outstanding. But it did come to with a shock to all of us, including probably the regional council team. And I have a question I'm getting to, so don't worry about that. So 22nd of August, it's kind of like 10-11 for us. What I want to be absolutely sure of, though, because, in August, it's almost, in terms of horticulture on the Heretaunga Plains, it's 75% through, perhaps 95% through their planning stage. So by then, they have ordered fruit trees, by then they have purchased new land, by then they have got all sorts of things happening. I just want to be, and I know you said so, Liz, but I just want to be absolutely assured that we are going to have an interim process here that allows for those people who this has come as a shock to, it's come as a shock to everybody, that they will not be unfairly treated, and that we're going to allow for a bit of a time here where we can manage those people's aspirations and their contingent liabilities, because of course if we didn't, that might fall back on us. The do nothing, I 100% agree, so I want your assurance on that, but we don't want to prompt a gold rush here. So do nothing is not an option, but doing this with an interim process is, you're certain we can manage that?
Yeah, so right from the beginning, when the information came forward to us, and we were discussing it with Malcolm and with Paul Barrett down the back there, their concern very much was around, well, we've had a number of people who've already been in to speak with us. They've in the middle of purchasing property or purchasing stock, as in plant stock, and that their intention is to apply for a resource consent, even though they may not have physically lodged it with us. And we've recognised that we're not at a critical stage, so we are just trying to manage this rationally and calmly, and B, that they've already made significant investments in it, and we're aware of those, and we've undertaken that those would be processed as that indeed been led to understand. Yeah.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. James, just following on from your response to Councillor Curtin regarding as consents come up for expire and come up for renewal, and that we have to consider existing use rights. which is obviously part of the RMA, that we have to do that, statutory obligation. I assume that if we have a water user who is, say, less community minded and is prepared to increase their water usage just out of spite, that sort of issue will be taken into consideration. In other words, the volume won't be grandfathered at a particular point, and that will be at some stage in the future, whether that's through the tank process or whatever, be looking at best use for a particular requirement.
So all replacement consents, I think, currently and going forward until the tank plan change becomes operative, will include conditions around the fact that that the allocations can be and most likely will be reviewed once that plan is operative. So there's a caveat, if you like, put into the consents. We will be going for relatively short duration consents in terms of replacement consents, with that coming down the line. When we announced the science here and the proposed response in terms of managing consents in the short term, we indicated that the tank group will be considering and recommending an allocation framework for water going forward, and in all likelihood they would be basing that on existing usage in terms of that allocation. So that's a signal to water users that any attempt to increase water use just to try and establish a higher baseline level from this point forward will have likely no advantageous effect to any one individual, and we will be looking at water usage up until the point at which this information became known, which is the last irrigation season. You could imagine that the tank group might well recommend a rolling multi-year average or something like that, and it may be that the framework enables a bit of reasonable headroom, but certainly given that irrigation practice and industrial water use has typically got an ongoing efficiency dividend that you get from new technology, the need to provide additional headroom on existing use is probably pretty low. But these are policy design questions for the tank group to work through. They'll be thinking about this comprehensively, and where we're at today is a set of holding positions really to manage the usage so that we don't get a gold rush of consents or any incentive for people to dramatically increase their use while that policy is being finalised.
Councillor Hewitt.
Not sure who will answer this question, maybe James. The irony of this is that the National Policy Statement has kicked in the Ruataniwha catchment and is biting severely, and now the Heretaunga growers are feeling exactly what we've been feeling down in Ruataniwha for quite some time. Based on the fact that this policy is going to be, National Policy Statement is going to be rolled out across the country, my question to you is, are we doing enough with this recommendation here? Or are we creating false hopes?
Councillor, I'm not entirely sure I understand the question in terms of your last statement.
You're asking us to endorse a proposed approach for the interim.
Yes.
Is that enough, or are we still creating false hopes?
So look, it's not enough in terms of the final policy framework that needs to come forward from the tank group process. This is very much a temporary holding position until that comes forward. The tank group will have to weigh up whether or not the existing pattern of water use across the Heretaunga Plains is acceptable in terms of meeting the community's values and aspirations, and it may well be that they conclude that a reduction is required. It may, or they may not. What they can't do, and what the council can't do under the National Policy Statement, is degrade water bodies further. So the requirement to maintain or improve overall water quality puts us in a situation where if groundwater abstraction, whether it be in the Ruataniwha Basin or in the Heretaunga Plains, has an adverse effect, an increasingly adverse effect on surface water quality, then we can't allocate more water. And that is the connection between water quantity management and water quality management, which becomes very real when you have strong surface-to-ground connectivity, as we do in Heretaunga.
So how can you get these outcomes to be, I mean, you're doing a lot of work with tank and community expectations and management, but I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to end up in the Environment Court with the NGOs probably wanting more and more and more than what you've already given. So how can we protect what's going on anyway?
Look, we're optimistic at this point that we don't end up in the Environment Court on the basis that we've got the broad range of key stakeholder groups around the tank group table who are collaboratively developing the rules. The intention, it would appear, from the applicants for the water conservation order is to not have an adverse effect on existing water users and to, at the very least, maintain water quality where it is today. The way in which they've drafted the order and the way in which the science has come forward latterly since they initiated their process suggests that actually the way it's been drafted, it would have an adverse effect on existing users, and I don't know that that was their intention. So I guess I would note that the environmental NGO community does appear to accept the value that the community draws from the water resource at the moment, and is seeking to not make matters worse. And I think that's aligned with where the tank group is at unanimously, which sat in behind their support for this decision, and is aligned with where the council is at, which is at the very least we need to make sure the situation gets no worse.
I would just interject that this wasn't sprung on the tank group. The science actually was rolled out and presented over 3 separate meetings, all pointing in a very clear direction, and as James has said, was ultimately unanimously accepted by all the parties. So certainly everybody around that table, wine growers, fruit growers, veggie growers, all of those folks, irrigators, all were represented through that whole series of presentations and discussions, and put themselves behind this recommendation. So I think everybody's had a fair crack at it through the tank process. But Councillor Curtin.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. A couple of things come to mind out of councillor comments. First being Councillor Graham's comment around August. The month of August seems a bad month given the events of this time last year, so we've beware the Ides of August. The second thing is around the Councillor Hewitt's inquiry around the adequacy of the recommendations, and I think we need to link those two, and my view is that one, the paper falls well short of providing a baseline for councillor decision on the recommendation, and I want to be clear on what the implications are for the science on particularly the minimum flows. Can we have some sort of analysis as to what the implications are? It's not in this paper. Secondly, we've got some words that I don't understand. It's like ball bearings going around and they haven't even got a hearing aid on. Around what can we do, what's in our power to do, given the state of play. I'm just trying to reconcile these things. This paper just does not get us there, doesn't provide that information. Can I have an explanation as to what happens when we have a minimum flow scenario on all the consents across the plains? Can we have that analysis done, please?
Is this in line with tank? Perhaps introducing a different...
Look, I think I can probably help Councillor. So the existing surface-connected consents, which is referred to in the briefing paper, will continue. So these are the ones, when I say surface-connected, they're surface-connected in terms of the way their consent conditions are currently drafted. So they are the consents which are presently under the existing Regional Resource Management Plan to be deemed to be surface-connected. Those consents will continue to be affected by minimum flows and be subject to irrigation ban. The wider consents that the science is showing also have a connection, do not presently have a regulatory mechanism to be affected by the minimum flowing to go under ban. That is something that will come through the tank plan change process. Now, there may be a question of equity, if you like. Now, that's always the case when planning and science is unfolding, that you have people whose consent conditions are wired to the information that was known at the time that those consents were created. What we're not suggesting is that we call in all the consents that the science now show are connected and do a fundamental review, because the tank plan change will be addressing all of those issues. We also don't believe we've got emergency powers in this circumstance, or that it warrants the use of any emergency powers to bring all of the surface connected through what the science suggests a surface connected takes onto an irrigation ban when we hit minimum flows next.
Could I just add another really important bit of context to that too, is that, so we're absolutely clear that the science isn't saying, that the modelling isn't showing that a take some distance across the plain is having an immediate stream depletion effect. What it's showing is that the cumulative effects of all of those takes operating in tandem over, it was a 150-day pumping period that the model was run for, has a combined stream depletion effect on the likes of the Ngāraroto in particular of about 1,200 litres a second. So therefore, if you're thinking about policy settings and management options, a minimum flow trigger actually isn't going to give you much benefit, because it would take, by the time you respond and implement a ban and turn the pumping off some distance away, it will be many, many days, potentially 150 days, before the impact or effect or benefit of that shutdown is seen in the river. So how you manage that is through your overall allocation and volume, not necessarily through immediate connection to minimum flow conditions. So it's a little bit nuanced.
Well, Mr Chair, could I just trouble you for one more question in regard to that? Perhaps I'll put it this way. Let's go back to 2013, which is a Sentinel year as well. And I'm a grower in Twyford, and I've been put on, I've had a take ban put on. And now I have this new knowledge, and I'm saying, no, don't go to me. You need to shut everyone else down, because the minimum flow is not connected to me, and I'm not totally responsible for it. Can you tell me if I have a legal case to say lift the ban because you're not applying your science according to what's going on?
The legal case would be pretty weak, I think, because the Environment Court will rely upon the regional plan and the consent conditions. They are what are operative at the moment, and they guide it. Now, science is always changing and evolving, and it might be contrary to the conditions that were previously locked in. And I think the Environment Court would also look to the fact that we have a plan change process well in train, that's quite advanced and coming through, and it would expect us to address that in the fullness of time. So we are in a period where the existing arrangements will have to roll forward. The best thing that the community can do to moderate those impacts on water users is to undertake conservative use of water, so that we have the least effect on stream flows, particularly in the main stem of the Ngāraroto, given everything we now know, which is why the council will be in a non-statutory way working this summer with the irrigation sector around irrigation efficiency, and we've already got discussions underway about working with both the industrial sector and the municipal suppliers in Hastings and Napier on water conservation this coming summer. So if the community pulls its weight collectively to be conservative in its water use, then we will reduce the in-stream impacts, and that will therefore flow into the minimum flows being hit later and less frequently with a bit of luck. But obviously we can't magic up rainfall, and if we do happen to have a very, very dry summer, it may well be that the minimum flows still get triggered and irrigation bans go on.
Councillor Wilson.
So, through you, Chair, to Mr Miller, 12.12 talks about provide scientific evidence. Can you give me an example of what you'd have to turn up with to get there?
I suppose we haven't got a good answer to that. It's really that if someone can perhaps probe further into the model and apply it to show that there's something different or explainable to say it's appropriate to take a bit more water in this location, then we would put that alongside what our scientists are saying. We'd ask our guys to assess it and tell us if it's actually valid, which might give access to water. So we're saying that, well, I guess the desire of the model is that we have one version of the truth. We're not really in dispute about, we're not going to have people with a competing model telling us here's a whole different story. But with the model, if they can just give us some finesse around the location, the nature of the take, and tease it out so that our science can accept it, then there may be a case to allocate some more water. But
Could I just add that the likelihood of that is very, very, very low. So we've spent several $1 million and taken many years to get a model that's operating at a regional scale to achieve something like Mr. Miller's suggesting will be, in the timeframes we're talking, virtually impossible.
Thank you. That's the answer. When this, or something similar to this, happened in Ruataniwha, did the consents just immediately stop?
Basically similar process. So the science was then there to say there is a direct connection. If you're taking groundwater, you are affecting flow in the river. With that, and the advice was we wouldn't want to see more water allocated. Basically, the same advice was then given to any pending applicants to say, well, you'll need to give us a demonstration to show us that there's something different to explain why you would take water. No one basically took that on. So
This is basically saying no.
Yeah, well, any party's allowed to apply, and so there's no moratorium to apply, but we're trying to send the message that the science is now different. We have a better understanding of the aquifer, more so than before, and that's telling us there isn't more water to allocate.
Thank you. So just to flesh that out a bit, Chair. So how many are maybe not how many are sitting there, but what volume of water is sitting there wanting to be uptaken that was lodged previous 18th of August?
Very, very little. It's the ones that are perhaps a bit awkward are the ones who've possibly drilled a bore but not applied for a consent yet. So started to put investment in place to be able to take water, but they haven't actually lodged an application. I don't really have a number, but you're probably in 1 million or so cubic metres, possibly in that order, could be sort of in the mix for people saying that they have started the process. They had an expectation that they could get water probably within 6 months or so through consents.
So just one more, Chair. 11.4 talks about a potential for a rush of consent applications. I'm really interested in that. I mean, how much greenfield opportunity is there on the plains for new water, and why would there be a potential rush other than there's so many 100,000 new trees ready to plant and people want water security as much as anything? To me, the horse has already bolted here, but I'm interested in what is the scope for new water?
Probably a good percentage is irrigated or holds consents. There are some pockets where there is no irrigation, and a recent one that was issued had grapes but never had water, so that it's converting to apples, and we've consented the water to be taken where it wasn't allocated before. So there's gaps around the plains, but not large gaps. I think the other pressure might be people wanting to possibly not having a consent for their full needs as calculated using SPASMO, so calculating the irrigation demand in a dry year and saying I haven't got all the water that I need for that, so asking to top up to that full amount. So everyone sort of coming in and trying to get the last bit of water that they might be entitled to on their property by our previous calculations. So I could sort of see a rush where a lot of people would just say, well, I haven't quite got the quota, I need more, I'm going to rush in now because there's last opportunity.
We are doing a bit of work to support the policy, the tank process, just around irrigation demand scenarios, what the future options might look like, land use change, what areas are unirrigated that may potentially be in the future. That's a bit of work that's being worked up at the moment.
Just a supplementary to that, to Mr Hanson, the pre-fees work that was done on Ngātaroro for water storage, is that a bit rough and ready, the potential new greenfield irrigation area? Because there was some work done, I understand.
I suppose that's a technical term, rough and ready.
It's there.
I'd say highly refined and well scrutinised is probably a better description. But certainly the greenfields opportunity was considered as part of the pre-feasibility. It looked at some irrigation potential or opportunity within the plains area, but it was actually the foothills or the perimeter areas where the primary greenfields opportunities, from recollection, I think it was 6,000 to 8,000 hectares of opportunity in that upper plains area. So it was analysed to that extent, looking at existing records and the history of it, as opposed to a finger in the air.
If I could close this out, I think it's fair to say the broader context in the tank group, all of these issues are being looked at. Water demand scenarios, water efficiency efforts, water augmentation, water storage, all of the above is part of the overall package that's moving forward on several fronts. So this, I think, needs to be taken in that context. And so in terms of whether it is a adequate answer in and of itself to the issues in that part of our region, well, no, it's not intended to be the answer to everything, but it's where we need to plant the flag at the moment to buy the time we need to finish the rest of the picture out. Is there anybody who wishes to comment further before I call the question on this? We've had a succession of questions and comments.
I'd like a question, just a last question, and this is looking forward. And I mean, I commend the tank group on the intensive work that they're doing, but it tends to remain a bit of a mystery to the rest of us. And I know that we're invited along, but that's not necessarily an answer. But I guess what I'm coming to is that when you get to the point with your tank proposal that you establish minimum flows, the question is, will you be aligning those minimum flows with what have been set through Plan Change 6 with the tuki? That's a question.
Look, the minimum flows will be set based on the decisions, well, the recommendations of the tank group, and that's a function of the values that the group is trying to protect, and I would suggest that it's independent, if you like, of what was finalised for Plan Change 6 and the tuki, and I'd make the additional observation that here we have a planning process which is very much in the hands of this community, and that will be determined through the Regional Planning Committee as opposed to a tribunal board of inquiry process.
I accept that, but I just don't believe it's, and this is hypothetical, that it's fair from an equity or any other point of view that the Ruataniwha basin is left with an anomalous situation that unfairly penalises those people compared with the rest of the region. We are, after all, a regional council.
So a principle of catchment-based planning, particularly where it's been driven by a community of interest, is that community will make determinations based on its values. I think in practice we're likely to see constraints on water use in the Heretaunga zone. which have impacts on water users that won't be dissimilar to those that we're experiencing with Plan Change 6.
Will be or won't be?
I don't think it'll be wildly different. I think we're going to see constraints on water use. We're facing them now, and there will be downward pressure needing to be applied on water use if we are to get high levels of an ecological function. I'd make the observation that one of the benefits, if you like, of having a relatively transmissive aquifer system is that the benefits of water storage and augmentation of surface flows by groundwater are quite considerable, and so there are probably reasonably low cost options for managing surface flows in Heretaunga, which might not exist in the Ruataniwha Basin, just given the different geological characteristics. Ruataniwha is a tight aquifer. Water moves through it slowly and is old, typically. So managing surface flows through using groundwater to augment is more difficult down there than it is in Heretaunga. So there are different hydrological and geological characteristics of the two catchment, which then drive a different mix of options and solutions. So we're slightly comparing apples with oranges here in terms of the management options.
I move.
I have a mover of the recommendation. Is there a seconder?
Mr. Chair,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I wonder whether to avoid
Option 2, by the way.
to avoid an amendment, I wonder whether the mover and second would consider an addition to the 2.2 recommendation, and it's simply to continues and urgently present long-term solutions to meet water demand.
Yeah, I would accept that. That's a good amendment.
Councillor Bailey?
I wish to speak.
Sorry, what's the wording?
Sorry, Chair, before that motion gets put forward, can we just have some clarity about what is intended? We've obviously got a tank process, and we've thrown every available resource the council has at supporting that process to move as fast as it possibly can. Are we talking about something different to tank bringing forward urgent solutions?
Well, I don't know. I just wanted an urgent assessment and presentation about what the long-term options are, whether that comes from tank or
Yeah, I would think that could come from tank.
So I would suggest it'll need to come from tank. And I just want to be very clear that you're not asking the staff to invent some new process or do something over and above what we're currently fully committed to doing.
maybe, but it's up to you, staff.
Okay.
I wish to speak.
Well, I think Councillor Hewitt wants to see the words.
Well, while she does see the words, put them up. Neil, could you just tell her what the...
And urgently present long-term solutions to meet water demand.
Perhaps urgently understand, not present. Would you accept that? Urgently understand, which as councillors I think we need to do. Okay, I wish to speak. 22nd of August is a major time for us as a region, and the science is right. I think everyone accepts that as a community, and I'm one here, I was born and raised on the Heretaunga Plains, I always thought that we just had water to burn. Everyone thinks that. And I think that the 22nd of August told us something different, and we need to react to that, and we need to react to that with some urgency. And that's not just growers out there on the plains, it's everybody on the plains. It is everyone in the towns. And Havelock North, I'm told that Havelock North uses 3 times more water than the average, international average. So I'm not sure on that, but we certainly need to know, and we need to have a good look at ourselves if that is true. So we all need to save water. And I think we can save 10% pretty quickly if we're going to go forward. One of the things that we mustn't do is overreact to this science. We need to be very cognizant that economic development drives our community, and that's what's been so good about the tank process, is that everyone's understood that they need economic development, but it needs to be in harmony with the environment and need to maintain their streams and creeks and rivers. So we're going to have a good look at ourselves. This Heretaunga community, and that is everyone here, Napier, Hastings, Havelock, all the people on the plains, will have to look at how they can save water going forward in the future and how they can use it better. That will mean better technologies on our orchards and farms, and we can do that. There is no doubt about it. We can take huge capacity or use out of this system that we've got at the moment. But we are going to have to look at mitigating options, as Neil has alluded to, and that will include water storage, and that will include augmentation schemes, where water storage is effectively augmentation anyway. And I want everyone to be very clear here, because we're getting 3 people around the table raising Ruataniwha. And this debate is not about Ruataniwha, so I don't know why we're doing it, but just in case you are in any doubt, I am already talking to the big players on the Heretaunga Plains and saying, what do you intend to do about this, guys? This is not a question that is that the people of Wairoa have to address. This is an issue that the people of Heretaunga have to address. If they want to build a dam, then they have to go and build a dam with our advice and counsel, but not necessarily with our money. And if they want our money, they will pay a return on our investment, not like Ruataniwha. So don't go and compare Heretaunga to Ruataniwha. It is not the same. We will look and we will solve these problems, and our community will solve these problems, and we won't go begging to Wellington and begging to everyone else to help us to do that. So be very sure on that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bailey, you wish to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I see this as, it is a huge wake-up call for the people of Heretaunga, but to me it's also a really strong indication. In fact, it's a definite indication to my mind that we've reached an ecological limit. We cannot allocate water which just isn't available. I was pleased to hear from Mr Maxwell that it's the model, my understanding of it in terms of we aren't at crisis point, that we have some time to be able to deal with the issue that's confronting us, and that is cool. We've got some time to be able to deal with the issues that are confronting us around allocation. Because I always keep on asking myself, when we are allocating water, does use A give more bang for buck than use B? How dynamic can we make the consents to look forward? All these sort of important issues to consider, and I'm sure that there's many others. But we've got time to sit down and consider those. Not much time, but time nevertheless. Because it doesn't matter if we go out and augment or build a dam or whatever, we're still going to be reaching a limit. And I think that's a wake-up call for everyone, and because the same things happen down in Ruataniwha in terms of we've reached an ecological limit down there in terms of the amount of water that can be allocated out of the aquifer. And we need to deal with both those issues, but they are separate issues. But we have to deal with both of them nevertheless. So I'm happy to support this motion, which puts into place an interim measure so that we can sit back and look at the long-term process. Thank you.
So before we proceed, I would just note that the language is not grammatically sound. We endorse the proposed approach for the interim management, blah, 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 and request presentation of long-term solutions and request urgent presentation of long-term solutions to meet water demands. Does that capture what? Sounds beautiful. Does anybody have a compelling need to comment further on this subject?
Yes.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair.
Go for it, Councillor Curtin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm giving you.
Oh,
the
gosh,
mic,
I've got
yes.
the chair. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, is
and-
that a right reply?
Pardon?
Is that a right reply? Because I've got something I want to say.
I didn't move.
There's still a whole lot of people speaking.
Okay, sorry.
Mr. Chair, I possibly diverge very markedly from the mover and the seconder's commentary for these reasons. Firstly, we do have a crisis. It's been a crisis now for some several years. It is akin to the Havelock North crisis of last year, except instead of being located in the lofty heights of Havelock, it's spread right across the plain. Mr. Chair, we've a situation significantly of this council's making. We manage the resource, we make the allocations, we issue the consents. And clearly, despite this paper not telling us what that looks like, that allocation process, we do have a crisis in consenting. We're over-allocated, clearly. Why on earth are we allocated to such an extent, I don't know. The paper doesn't explore and tell us, for example, what processes are we going to employ to ensure water use more correctly and accurately matches water allocation. Have we overcome the problem of allocation which we're facing? Mr. Chair, the interim measures themselves do not explore fully and amply, and should do by the presentation of this paper back to Council, the moves and the capability to manage both current resources, the current allocation, whether there are powers of this Council to reassess and limit the allocations that are made. Secondly, what is the potential to alter and manage expired consents, and we've had some overview of new resource allocation and potential to act in that area, and yet it does not contain, the paper does not contain, an assessment of what that demand is likely to be. We've heard these nebulous and references to gold rush. What on earth does that mean, and how does that translate into the policy which is predicted? So I'm somewhat vexed, might be the word, I've got other words that I could use, about this paper and the responsiveness of our team to it, because we've already had the heads up in 2013 that we have a crisis. We have a crisis. When the rain doesn't come down, we are in trouble. And I would suggest, Mr. Chair, that the science that has been presented clearly tells us that we can no longer rely on limited responsiveness to water deficits in the peak of the season. We're now being told by the science that we have a problem right across the plains. This is Hawke's Bay's most significant economic conundrum. We must respond to it much more urgently than Tank in its current format, unless the Chief Executive can come back to Council and describe how Tank is going to respond with urgency in addressing this. Yes, we do need an alternative and parallel process to bring back to Council means to meet the long-term demand. I would suggest that the hubbub around the water conservation order pales into insignificance when it comes to the science that has been revealed in the last few weeks to Council at least. We must respond. This is our problem. It is a Council core function to respond to. It is, in fact, we are part of the problem, given that we're the agency that has consented and allocated over the long period of time in which we now find ourselves in crisis. It is excessively naive to suggest this Council will not be in the business of supporting, funding and contributing to the obviously required water augmentation that's to follow. Put aside all the Heretaunga issues. We need to get over that and move on to say we have this crisis, this Council needs to respond. I am staggered to hear that and I'll be certainly looking for the right of reply from the chair, I am staggered that the constituencies throughout the Heretaunga Plains will hear from this council, we will do nothing. We will be saying to you, we will support you, we'll get our pom-poms out and cheerlead, but we're not going to do anything. Mr. Chair, doing nothing is not part of what this council should be responding to. We need to be active, proactive, and getting right into this, resourcing it and investing in it post-haste.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be a bit shorter than that. Councillor Curtin has stolen a bit of my thunder, and I do believe he snuck a bit of time in on your chair. You should have had your stopwatch out. But anyway, look, going forward, I tend to agree with Councillor Curtin. This is a far bigger issue than this interim measure will even attempt to hold back. And to be blunt, whether it's called conservation order, whether it's called plan change 7 or 8 or 10 or 20, whatever it's going to be on the Heretaunga Plains, the imposition that is currently being felt in the Ruataniwha Plain will be felt on the Heretaunga Plains, full stop. You can hide behind a couple of hundred tractors next week, fellas, but in all reality, it's coming. And I think the sooner the growers on the plains get their head around that, understand the issues, we have a far better chance of having a conversation where we can co-invest with this community to provide a solution, just as we intended to do in the Ruataniwha Plain.
Councillor Dick, and then we will finish with Councillor Graham.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, a positive suggestion. From now on, when our planners and consent people get inquiries about irrigation for horticulture or whatever, I suggest they send them up to the Wairua district, which will be able to accommodate their needs.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you. We've commenced this debate by looking at an interim management of groundwater resources, and it's dived into an Aurora water storage discussion. So all I can say to your debate, Chair, is outright hypocrisy. What the people of Central Hawke's Bay are facing is just a fraction of what the Heretaunga catchment are going to be facing with what's coming their way. And like it or not, the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management is for the whole country. It isn't going to be going all around everybody except the Heretaunga catchment. And if for some reason there should be needing, the Heretaunga catchment should be needing government support and council support, well, I think that we should be saying, yes, we're behind you, not, no, you can't have a bar of it. So, as I said, I'm just appalled at the hypocrisy of some of you around the table.
Councillor Graham.
Well, called a hypocrite. Twice, and actually 3 times, because your Facebook pages are just going berserk at the moment. But put all that nonsense aside, and I'm trying to put the rest of the nonsense that I'm hearing around this table aside for a second. We do not have a crisis. We have the science, just as mentioned, just another fact, this is outstanding science that has been internationally recognised. So let's put a few things. And they're not saying we have a crisis. No one's saying we have a crisis. We have a situation where if we pull down the amount of water that we have consented, our streams and rivers will be adversely affected. That's what we have. We have plenty of water in the aquifer. The science isn't telling you otherwise. If you don't think that, go round to my place right now and have a cup of tea, take the head off my well and see how strong the head is in my well. The aquifer is full right now. So it does replenish. And especially when you have a season like this, some seasons perhaps it doesn't, but when you have the immense rain that we've had in this season, it does replenish. We have a situation where when we pull out a large amount of water out, all of us, that's what the science is saying, we have a situation where some of our streams and our rivers will be affected, and that will affect the fish and the plant life in those streams. So it's not a crisis. We can manage this. Now, of course, we're going to have to look at mitigating effects, and of course we're going to have to, and water storage will possibly be one of those. It was always on the cards that water storage. But I've already clearly said, I do not see the council putting in money, and I really tire of people calling our money that we were going to put into Heretaunga as investment. It's not a definition. It was like that, their definition of break even, for God's sake. They were redefining the business manual. And if you put an investment, you want a return on investment. And if, by some slim chance, we have to stump up capital to put in a water storage scheme, I will be, if I'm still the chair, we will be getting return on our investment. And that's different from Heretaunga. Just because you come up with a cock and bull bloody solution for water storage in Central Hawke's Bay, don't blame me. Don't call me a hypocrite. It was a rubbish scheme. And it failed because of that for all sorts of reasons. It didn't even have a piece of land to go on. So don't go back there. What we need to do with the people, since you have raised it, the people in Central Hawke's Bay, is say, what do you want to do? How do you want to do this now? How do you want to handle your water situation, your storage situation and your mitigation situation, everything? We won't drive that, just like we won't drive it in Heretaunga. They will drive it, and they are in tank, and they're doing a fantastic job. And I just want to say thanks to our scientists for the bringing to the table this new science, which has been a revelation to us all, and because it allows us to go forward in a proper fashion. Thank you.
Well, I have a few comments, and I'm going to call for the vote here. In a way, I'm getting tired of being a cheerleader for the tank process, but I feel I have to be, unless someone here today is prepared to put a motion on the table that says junk tank, stop it, bring all the issues directly to this table, preempt that process, then I think folks either have to get off their butts, go to those meetings, get as informed as they ought to be on the issues, not expect a private tutorial on these issues, because we're not going to provide one. You can learn everything you need to learn about the big picture on the Heretaunga Plains by going to those meetings and reading, or if not going to the meetings, reading the paperwork associated with them. And so I mean, there's some really nonsensical statements that have been made here about lack of effort, lack of foresight, lack of energy being put into identifying the long-term issues around this catchment. It's nonsense. Nonsense. If the Heretaunga stakeholder process was 1/100th as well-informed and well-managed as this one has been, you might have gotten a different outcome down there. That's the fact of the matter. And what's happening instead in this case is that every stakeholder involved in this issue is fully engaged, is fully informed, is fully able to challenge anything that they feel is not being adequately examined, and it is happening. Could it happen faster? I don't know. I doubt it, given what I see, the complexity of the issues to be, and the expectation on all parties' part that adequate homework be done before decisions are brought to the table to be made by that group. So I don't see much prospect of accelerating that process. And as far as I'm concerned, it is doing exactly what this council has asked it to do. And if you're unhappy with that, then show up at the meetings and sound off, because you're all invited to do so. Otherwise, try to make more intelligent comments if you choose to be uninformed. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the recommendation, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Want that recorded?
Yes, please.
All those in favor? Okay, got that. All those opposed? Easier?
Mr. Chairman, I don't vote. I can't vote, sorry.
So there's 2 opposed.
No,
I'm sorry? You abstain? Okay. Next agenda item, I think, is in Liz's court, Panpac.
Just Chair, if I could put a point of order, and if you wish to have a speech, even though you are the chair, could you do it before it's summed up next time? Or I will call a point of order.
You may, and I'll overrule your point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is
Meeting the standing orders, Chair, you don't have that choice.
It's my meeting to run. Fine. Take a hike if you wish. Councillor.
Classy, Chair. Can, before this starts, can one of the staff please clarify, should this not go through, are any councillors who are here who have the ability to be hearings committee panel members, if they're party to this discussion, does that rule them out?
So you're saying if there are hearings committee members here, should they not participate in this? Is that what you're saying, asking?
Clarifying, should it go back to a panel discussion?
In other words, do we have a conflict?
through you, Mr. Chair. I don't see that there'd be a problem because we're not discussing matters of content or specific to the consent. It's purely a process issue.
Everybody's happy with that? Let's proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just ask Mr. Miller just to briefly outline what's proposed here. I would just note for you that we have been caught here by the timing. This application was received by us straight after the last council meeting, and the timelines don't allow it to be considered it has to be considered before the next council meeting. So we will be asking if you are of a mind to accept the recommendation to then make it a decision of council today, please. But I'll ask Mr. Miller just to briefly outline the actual details of the consent.
Thank you, Liz. This is an application by Panpac to replace their existing consent, outfall consent. That did go through applications recently because of their discoloration issue and went to the Environment Court, and they obtained consent to extend the pipeline out to 2 kilometres and extend the diffuser in order to be able to dilute the discharge so that then it wouldn't be conspicuous from shore or basically from looking down at it. So that was only granted about 18 months ago, but they were asking for a change of condition to be able to do that. This time round, or the consent has now expired, so they're asking to replace their consent and replace it by putting it out to the 2 kilometre point. They hadn't actually exercised their consent, and they're just in the process now of doing the preparation so they can install the extension. So they're doing that under the existing consent. This consent then comes around for replacement. Because of that process that they went through, and that the fact they went to the Environment Court previously, they've judged that they're probably going to go there again, I believe, and they've got the right to ask for a direct referral. So instead of coming through our hearing process, they're entitled to request that they go straight to the Environment Court, which is what they've done. From our point of view, we council need to make a decision to allow that to occur. From a staff point of view, we see no reason why it shouldn't occur. It potentially saves cost if it were going to go to the Environment Court anyway. It saves the intermediary step of a hearing here, and it saves that cost, and it saves time basically. So that's essentially it. They've asked. It's Panpac's initiative to ask. It's for council to allow it. If we do, then it will proceed to a hearing, one hearing at the Environment Court.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. So what you're telling me is that from the paper, from paragraph 3 in the paper, is that Panpac has had applied for a resource consent to replace the current consent for the outfall structure to occupy the seabed, right? So they've applied for a resource consent that hasn't been granted yet.
That's correct.
So, and what you're telling me is that they've actually started construction before they've been granted consent?
Not under this consent. So they've got an existing consent.
Right, that's for the out to the 500 metres or whatever it is.
They've got a consent out to the 2 kilometres. So that was a change of condition that went through 18 months ago. But because it's a change of condition, was treated in that manner, the expiry date remained the same. So it's expiring in December. This is an application to replace so that they can continue.
Okay, right. So there is already a current consent, but it's expiring in December, and they're looking at rolling it over. Then
that's correct.
Okay, that clears that up for me. Just one further question. Paragraph 8, you talk about Tangata Whenua submitted to the application and expressed their opposition. I'm just trying to get an idea of what you mean by expressed. Is if I was to say to rate it from a scale of 1 to 5, and 5 they were totally opposed, and 1 they was, just warmly opposed.
They've lodged submissions in opposition to the consent, is how we would describe it.
No, not to this. Not to this.
Yes, it is to this. So we've received it. We've notified it. We've started the process. We've notified it. It's attracted 13 submissions, and at the day that the submissions closed, Panpac had the right to say we would like it to go to direct referral. They had a 5-day window to actually apply to us for that opportunity. So they've waited for the submissions to be lodged to see what the mood of parties was, and decided it's actually probably better.
If I could interject, all I'm questioning, which I think is maybe what Mr. Bailey is after as well, in number 8, when it says they express their opposition, is it their opposition to the various works involved, or is it opposition to this shortcutting of the process?
No, sorry, it's opposition to the application, so that to the works, to the presence of the outfall and the discharge in the ocean.
Do they have a position? Do any of these 13 have a position on taking the shortcut, if you will?
No, they're not actually involved in this step. They're not. They have no say in that matter.
So further question, supplementary to that. So what you're suggesting then is that Panpac hasn't consulted with the other submitters to see if they were happy to take this. Happy for Panpac to take this step.
No, but I don't know that they haven't had some communication with them. I've got an idea they have actually informed the submitters that they're taking a step. They're not obliged to consult on this point. Look,
I understand there's not an obligation to, but if you want to smooth the waters, you would think that they would have sought the approval of the other submitters to take this rather direct step.
Nothing's been communicated to us from Panpac in relation to communication with the submitters.
Yes, no.
Mr. Chairman, I move the recommendations.
And I second it, Chair.
No, can I speak first?
I'm not ready to take a motion yet.
So, we have a hearings committee chair who's paid by the ratepayer to the tune of about $12,000 per annum. Why hasn't this come through the hearings committee as a recommendation from there?
Because of the timing, we've basically got 15 working days from receipt to actually have this decision reported back to Panpac. So there was no scheduled hearings committee, no scheduled council committee. So we've come through the next convenient committee to address this.
Perhaps we should be disbanding the hearings committee then. I mean, this is a really important issue, and the hearings committee, I believe, should have been called. So my next question is the staff recommending that we follow this action?
Yes.
Councillor, Mr. Moe.
Yeah, on the risk of conflict of interest, I'm the cultural advisor to Panpac, but Mana Ahuriri also asked me to represent them. What happened was a working group of people that live along the foreshore and the Tangata Whenua groups, I think there was 4, arranged to have 7 monthly meetings
starting from last January, to come up with the various alternatives to putting the pipeline out 2Ks. And at the end of that process, went through an assessment and points, and it was agreed that the most economical way and culturally, environmentally sound process would be to put it out from the 500 metres out to 200, out to 2Ks. Of the 7 meetings, Shane Walker attended 3 or 4. Mana Aureri attended just 1 and then asked me to represent them. So, and then also Pahu Wera attended half of the meetings. All the iwi groups that attended said they didn't want to be seen that their attendance was approval of the process. So it was a little bit of a mixed bag there. I also attended the last Environment Court, the 2.5 days, 3.5 days, was it? 3.5, yeah, days Environment Court. And the judge said at the end that Maunga Haruru, who were opposing it at the Environment Court, did not have the power of veto for the process. And so now we have a process where if the Panpac had gone ahead with the proposal 18 odd months ago, and given that was the middle of winter when they got the verdict, they would have only had 6 months before the consent ran out. So they decided to hold off and have this workshop process and then apply for a process for a time which would go much longer. So that's basically the process. As far as asking the groups whether they can go directly to the Environment Court, I'm not actually sure, because we didn't have a meeting after they decided to go straight to the Environment Court rather than coming back to the Hearings Committee. So I don't know whether that's clearer or muddier.
Back to you, Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not entirely sure whether who can clear this one up, but Councillor Hewitt made an assertion that the chair of the Hearings Committee is remunerated for that role. I wasn't aware that that was the case, or am I incorrect?
You're incorrect.
He is remunerated.
Mr. Chairman, I did move. Is it appropriate to move to deliberation now?
There are no other questions?
I'm second that, Chair.
That's fine. Would you wish to comment?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the recommended process here will not in any way diminish the democratic process that's involved, and given the events of the recent past, it is very, very clear that even if there was initially a hearing held here, that it would be referred to the Environment Court. So all of the concerned persons will have their day in court, and democracy will rule. So I believe it's just a pragmatic and appropriate measure to take.
Just very briefly, we've come across this before, that we had an application from the Wairau District Council from memory when they did the whangaway scheme for this very reason, for twofold. One, to expedite the process, I guess, because it had been through similar I don't want to say confrontation, but similar differing views, I guess, in the process previous. And also, it does save everyone, including the applicants, I might say, perhaps some money in the process. So.
Anybody?
Just a brief comment, Mr. Chair. Clearly, this is a process that makes sense in terms of how these things work, but I would point out the irony of the situation where we are now moving to pass autonomy and power and decision making from this council across to a third body. I'm not sure whether they come from Wellington or not, but we're passing our decision-making processes out of town, if you like. It will be of interest, I'm sure, to the Regional Planning Committee.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair,
Peter?
point 8, I do feel sorry for the tangata whenua. If this recommendation is approved of going direct to the court, we're going to have groups that can't really afford to hire that high level of lawyers. Whereas having the hearing here, it may finish up back in the court, but there could be a compromise. There could be an fair hearing from the tangata whenua. But we all forget that even the court will be looking at the 4 well-beings. And in there is iwi and the environment, but they're the bottom two in this consideration. So that is my worry. And the way it's going, any pollution at all out of that pipeline, whether it's dust, whether it's chemicals, treated timber, 2 miles out or 2.5 k's out, will hit the Wairoa hard. That's the biggest breeding ground of fish in the area. I mean, that's why there's gannets up that way now. So the pollution that's going to happen, the tides take everything into that little area, and then from there on to Whakaki. So when the motion's put out, because of the tangata whenua, I'd have to vote against it.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at paragraph 8 about submitters' rights. It would have given me a lot more comfort if Panpac had have advised us or given us an indication that the submitters were happy to have taken this approach. I'm conscious that it's not their statutory obligation to do so, but I think it's their civic and ethical duty to do so. So I'm having trouble supporting this application to pass us straight through to the Environment Court rather than having it reheard again locally.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, Ms Lambert had expressed a desire for this decision to be a council decision.
Right.
Are we doing that in this case? What's your withdrawing on that?
Well, it's sounding like we might not get it over the line in that respect. But I think we have to test that first. So
you do one.
Yeah. Anybody else care to speak?
Well, just, Mr. Chair, just in terms of the costs, at the last hearing, I think it was 2 days, and the Patani, Marae and Maungaharuru had to hire a lawyer for those 2 days, and it was quite expensive. It is going to end up in the Environment Court, so what I'm saying is we're not saving money by going to the hearings first. You're actually imposing that cost as well as the next cost.
Any other speakers?
Chairman,
Yes.
can I just make a point? In their application, they have indicated they're willing to be involved in mediation, pre-hearing type meetings. So there is that opportunity, even if they are advancing to the Environment Court, that there would be some informal discussion before it gets to the Environment Court, which could bring the submitters to the table without perhaps the expense of lawyers.
Just clarify for my benefit, I take it that in the earlier iteration of this that went to the Environment Court, that it went there because have been implacable opponents on either side of this issue, and that remains the case. And that's where the surety is that you're referring to, that this will wind up in the Environment Court anyway. Is that those who know are in the know? Is that your take on this?
It's correct.
All right. So the recommendation that's been moved is to, let's take 2.1 here. No, I'm sorry, 2.1 and 2. Wait, I'm sorry, wait a minute, I'm on the wrong one.
Could I have a brief right of reply?
Let me catch up with where we are here. So, we received the report.
Can I have a brief right of reply, please?
Oh, yes, sure, sorry.
Okay. or just note the point that's been made by staff that there is the opportunity for pre-conferencing if it goes to the Environment Court, but also make the point that 1 and 2 can pass by majority, but 3 requires
Unanimity.
the unanimous support of everyone in the room. What has happened in the past is that people have found it expedient, rather than stand in the way of a council decision, to leave the room when it comes to a decision of council resolution such as in 3.
So just to be
Mr.
clear,
Chairman,
on number 3, it is only, well, if we get to number 3, it is only councillors who are voting at that point, correct?
No, it would include Mr. Paku, but if he's in the room, but if he's not in the room, then it doesn't.
Well, no,
No, that's not
if
correct.
this recommendation were referred to
That's
the
not correct.
council at a subsequent council meeting, it would only be councillors who would vote on whether to accept that recommendation or not.
You're correct, Chair.
So it's only councillors will be voting
For
number 3.
Are you sure about that?
Through you,
I'm
Mr. Chairman, yes,
surprised.
we checked that deliberately when the recommendations are being written with
Okay.
Mrs. Hooper.
All right.
So can I take you as moving 1 and 2 for the moment?
Yes.
And seconder 1 and 2? Okay. So all those in favor of recommendations 1 and 2, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Councillor Bailey and Peter. And you're abstaining. Would not appear that there's any point. We have yours? Yep. No point in testing number 3.
I think it should be tested, Mr.
All right. We would have a quorum, yep.
Yes, you will have a quorum.
So would someone care to move number 3?
Aye.
Second? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
No.
Opposed? Carried. Is it tea time here? Peop- Are people disposed to take a quick break here? Only 10 minutes, because you all exerted yourselves on the first agenda item here.